So the fellowship might well be with undesirables, you know what I mean? People that we normally would prefer not to have anything to do with. It's rather like when I go to communion, you know, and I kneel down, and I'm not allowed to choose who I kneel next to. I can't say, oh, I don't like him, I'd rather not have anything to do. I'll wait. And maybe because I'm ordained, maybe I should get a better meal than the rest. Maybe I should have a flavored wafer. No, I get the same as he does. Scruffy as she or he may be. And we kneel there together because it's not mine, it's all entrusted. It's pretty scary when I suddenly think, I wish I weren't kneeling next to this person. But apparently, they were invited to the table. I'd better start thinking differently about this person. I better start looking at this one differently because they were invited by the same one who invited me. So we're guests. That's what community is about. Holy communion is not just communion of good old boys and good old whatever the other group of good old women. I nearly said that sounds. But it's not just all pals together. And that's what happens when you start taking what's entrusted and beginning to use what God's entrusted for God's benefit. Who knows what happens? Holy Communion starts to be Holy Communion with a much wider body. Not just, I was taught to think that communion, or pretty well all church services, was you and me, God. That's why I used to sit as far away from everybody as possible, because I had nothing to do with me. They happened to be facing the same way, singing the same song, roughly the same songs, and they weren't my business. I was there, you and me, God. I'm having communion. Then some character introduced the exchanging of the peace. And I actually had to start speaking to somebody in church. And I recall after I became bishop, I used to walk right down the aisle, and I was toddling down the aisle, and a rather formidable looking woman stepped out of her pew like this. And she picked me up and hugged me and whispered into my ear, "I hate this." And also with you. But you see, we started to discover that there was some kind of bond we'd never experienced before. We started to have a sense of, I don't know you, but somehow if I can say to you, the peace of Christ be with you, I can't just say that and turn away. Somehow we're related. That's God's benefit. I believe that's what God is longing for us to discover, that the concerns and love of God for the world is so much wider than most of us have ever dreamed. Some of the most unlikely characters are beloved of God. And I think that's not fair. They go to some other church, or they don't go to church at all. Or they're the wrong colour. Or they sing hymns that I don't like. That greatness is expressed in serving, in looking for what God wants us to do and getting on with it, no matter what. Costly? Well, Jesus said, I'll tell you how costly it is. It talks about a cross. That's how costly it is. A cross represents total giving. Nothing left. Nothing held back. And Jesus says that's what it's about. And that's what we're called to. And that's pretty daunting. And we say, well, we can't get that far. Well, Jesus said you don't have to get that far in the first step, but at least point yourself in that direction. Take that first step in that direction. Take up a cross. Follow me. We'll get there. It may take a long time. It may take a lot of steps. But we'll get there. And messages do go out. Just the very way we treat the offertory on a Sunday is an example of a message that can be so misleading. Let me tell you about a church. I'd never known it happened before. I just about fell out of my chair. I was still in office at the time, and I was quietly sitting in my chair. No, I wasn't. I was at the altar. I was standing behind the altar, and the people had sung the offertory hymn, and the bread and the wine were on the table, and the brass plates came up, and they piled one or two on top of the other and gave them to me, and I took them, and as I went, they sang "God Save the Queen." I mean, if I'd produced that in a cartoon, I'd have made a fortune. Apparently, that's what they did. And then a server reached up, snatched these plates off from me, gave them back to the collectors, and they sneaked off into a side room, and I could see them from where I was standing. Actually, it was that side. I looked across. There were three men sitting around a table, counting the money, smoking. If that's the message, we are collecting money to pay the bills, we've got to count it and put it away. That's the message. I don't know how you avoid it. I find it very difficult to say, all things come of thee, and of thine own have we given thee. However, we want to get it counted and in the bank before we lose it, and off it goes. I don't know how many times I've had to fight with servers and sometimes clergy who snatch the plate away and it goes off into some dark space somewhere. And, I know all about, liturgical teaching. I went to theological school once. Didn't like it. Oh, no, sir. But I know all about you mustn't clutter up the table with... I don't think the offertory is a cluttering up of anything. I think the message is that this secular stuff called money belongs alongside the other secular stuff, which is bread and wine. And they're all consecrated. And they all are given back to serve the mission of the church. I believe that's the message of engaging in the mission. That's the message. And as long as we behave as if that money is somehow different from the bread and wine, we've got a problem. We're in the business of giving up our life, forgetting ourselves, and engaging in something God wants us to do. Why, don't you find it interesting and exciting that Sunday by Sunday, we come to our Eucharist and we are confronted by a God, and we see the bread and the wine, and we're confronted by a God who says, look what I'm giving. Look at my stewardship. I don't know how we can avoid responding. I've talked a lot about this over the years, but for me, one of the highlights of every Eucharist is the moment of the offertory. I object to the word collection anymore. If you want a collection, to pay the bills. That's not where it happens. I'm talking about the offertory, when the bread and the wine and our offertory of money, financial resources, are put on the altar. That's a magic moment. That's a highlight, because we're seeing all that God means, and we're allowed to make a response, and that's the best we can do. And my pathetic little offering and your pathetic little offering, side by side in a bowl, are put on the altar alongside the bread and the wine. And there are two examples, and God says there, now do you understand how much I love you? God so loved that he gave. And I say, with all the rest of you, God, now you see that we love you too. After I could go home at that point, I don't, because there's something coming further. But what a magic moment when, just for that fleeting moment, I'm reminded of God and I'm allowed to make a response. And my response is very small. It is a token of all that I have, and all that I am is summed up in what I've put on the plate. It's a token of Douglas Hambidge. And it's a token of offering of myself. That's all I've got. I can't offer somebody else, I can only offer me. And God says, I offer me. And then, as the service proceeds, it's as if God says, now take these things back. Eat this bread, drink from this cup, and take this money and engage in my mission. Now we go. And that's where the work begins. That's where the church goes into action. I find that if we miss this at our Eucharist, we are, of all people, most to be pitied. Because God is speaking directly to every last one of us. That's why we're there. That God is actually engaging us and telling us, this is who I am. This is what I do. Now you respond. I love that final blessing where I use the phrase, go from this place to where God calls you to serve. That's where the action is. You can't stay in the upper room. You've got to get out there. You've got to find your Galilee where Jesus is working. And that's what the church is all about. And that is what stewardship's all about. And don't let anyone tell you that it's anything less than that.